to another North London Ulysses video in which we do our best to get through this book, Joyce Ulysses. And we're a combination of live readings in the pub and then these videos in which I read a segment of the of that week's reading and then do my best to explain it. I'm Russell Raphael. So in the pub last time we read pages 525 to 540 in the Oxen of the Sun episode. And then in the last video, I actually repeated all of that. So you got the complete, if you only watch the videos, you're not in the pub, you actually got the complete reading. And it's now my tricky task to try and make some sense of it. So we're starting on page 525. We're in the maternity hospital in Hollis Street. Mulligan has just arrived with someone he's just met in the street, Alec Bannon. He was surprised. He's out in Mullingar. He wondered what he was doing in Dublin. They were both sheltering in a doorway because after 6 weeks of drought, the heavens have opened. There was a huge thunderclap and it has chucked it down. And so Mulligan has arrived at the hospital with Bannon. They're both soaking wet and in they come. You might think, why are they going to a maternity hospital? Because Mulligan, having been to George Moore's party, has got the prospect of further boozing in the hospital JCR, where various student doctors have congregated. They've done they're off their shift and they're getting pretty drunk in the junior common room there. So that's where we join it on page 525. Our worthy acquaintance, Mr. Malachi Mulligan, now appeared in the doorway as the students were finishing their apologue. Right, so we are in the style now of Addison, whom, according to Atherton in his essay on this chapter, Joyce wasn't a great fan of Addison. So this is James Joyce's critical essays, one per episode, and the Oxen of the Sun episode has fallen to J.S. Atherton. And what he says here, 326, right, and he says, with his tongue in his cheek, Joyce elegantly adopts Addison's gentlemanly manner to present material so outrageously out of keeping with it as to make this one of the funniest passages of the book. The contrast between Addison's often declared intention to improve the taste and morals of the fair sex, in quotes, and Mulligan's outspoken plan to get them all pregnant is used to accuse Addison of the hypocrisy that Joyce believed to be his salient feature. So I thought that was useful just to set the tone for this next passage. And so in comes Mulligan, and he's accompanied with a friend, which we learn is Alec Bannon. And Bannon supposedly is in Dublin to buy a colour or a courtesy in the fencibles and list for the wars. So on the face of this, the army is sort of a career choice, and you can sort of buy, if you've got the money, you can buy a sort of lowly officer type status, but with some double entendre, particularly as Bannon, as we'll get into his story, and he'll describe his sexual liaison in the at one point in the context of sort of fighting in a war. And so what does he mean by his colours? Maybe he's come to Dublin to buy some contraceptives. I'm not suggesting he is, but it's a possible interpretation of that double entendre. And who is his girlfriend? Well, we've got our suspicion, but I think we'll leave that for another page or so. Mulligan then explains that he's started a new business venture, and it's not much of a business because he's not going to charge money for it. But it's pretty funny, and this is what Joyce is saying, how Mulligan, in the style of Addison, is setting out to help women folk, but actually he just wants to have sex with lots of them. So he's printed up these business cards: Mr. Malachi Mulligan, fertilizer and incubator, Lambay Island. And he goes on to say towards the bottom of that page that this sterility grieves him plaguely. You'll recall how the background to this chapter is Joyce is taking the subject of the act of sex not leading to procreation, that it's stifled, whether it's by contraception or abortion or stillborn. The population is not growing, and whether one takes this literally as Joyce's view, translated here through Stephen, or more appropriately, I think, in an artistic sense, so that in Ireland it's impossible for an artist to develop, to blossom, to reach maturity. You have to leave Ireland to do that, and this is something that needs attention, I think, is nearer the mark. And so over the page onto 526, he's expanding on what's distressing him about these poor women that not only are not getting pregnant, but even if they did, or if they had liaisons, they would be prey for the vilest bonzes. And a bit further down, what does he says? Some unaccountable muskin. One might think of Penelope's suitors at this point, whereas, on the other hand, they might multiply the inlets of happiness. Brings us in mind of Genesis, that go forth and multiply. Let's procreate and recreate, repopulate, and that with repopulation comes happiness. Multiply the inlets of happiness, which is something that Bloom was actually pretty critical of. This whole doctrine, Catholic doctrine, of have lots of sex within marriage, lots of kids. And Bloom, was it back in Haiti, says, yeah, but who's going to feed everyone? And you don't see hungry priests who are going round expounding this this doctrine, but they're not the ones that face the consequences of it. Right, so Mulligan is going to step in, and he's going to do the nation a service by being an impregnation machine, and he's going to buy this Lambay Island. So far, all he's done is had business cards printed, and obviously it's all completely tongue in cheek. And he's going to create this national fertilizing farm, which is to be named Omphalos, in the middle of that page. And part of the aspects of this episode is that each bit looks back to something that's occurred previous in the day. This puts us in mind of Telemachus, when Mulligan was talking to Daedalus and saying about the tower. We should make it into the Omphalos of Delphi. We need to Hellenize Ireland. That might make us think about Matthew Arnold, who thought that ways of thinking were divided into Jewish type thinking and Greek type thinking. Jewish was quite methodical, whereas Greek was a bit more free-thinking and experimental, and Matthew Arnold thought that throughout the Age of Enlightenment, Western thinking had become a little too Hebraic, and he thought it ought to be a bit more Greek, become a little too regimented, needs a bit more free thinking. And so is this part of what Mulligan is sort of suggesting with his, we need to Hellenize Ireland. So he's going to call it Omphalos. Omphalos was this building in ancient Greece, in Delphi, which was the center of culture. For him, it's going to be the center of sex, where he is going to be the chief fecundator or fertilizer, with this obelisk, a phallic-shaped obelisk there, where he'll do his dutiful yeoman services. And Omphalos, we had a reference again back in Telemachus, we ourselves, new paganism, Omphalos, new paganism, bringing anti-church, bring back paganism, the ancient Greeks, also maybe a hint of Nietzsche there with his, we need to throw off the shackles of Christianity, which is holding everything back, and minimizing our potential, according to Nietzsche. And Omphalos, also the Greek word for navel, the center of things, but linking back to, and in Telemachus, where we link back to Eve with all of our navel cords. Anyway, there we are. Mulligan standing up for fertility. And he's going to feed himself not with cows, but with savoury tubercles. I'm not sure what tubercles are, but fish and conies. They're sort of rodents. Right at the bottom of that page, he takes off from his hat, so he removes his hat, and underneath his hat, he's got a handkerchief over his head, which has shielded it, because it's been so wet that the hat wasn't good enough. And yet, this also hadn't been completely effective. His clothes are piebald because they're so rain-soaked, so a sort of cow reference there. But also, as with Bloom, when he came into the hospital, he removed his hat. I said that might be an allusion to contraception, because Bloom is going to be the sperm in our story. And so here, Mulligan also removes any form of shield or contraception for his fertilizing free thinking. And what if that sounds odd now, it won't once we get further into passages in a couple of pages' time. But I notice that it didn't protect him. He was still wet through. And now at the top of page 527, everyone around the table is laughing, although Dr. Dixon here, Mr. Dixon of Mary Misericordiae Hospital in Eccles Street, he didn't think it was so funny, and he said, would you also propose to carry coals to Newcastle? We'd all like to spend our time making lots of women pregnant. Or would we? I mean, I rather glibly say that. Mulligan, ever the wit, rises to the bait and comes back with his own joke. Whether it was really in Latin or whether it's in the style of this in Latin, I don't know. But he comes out with that Latin phrase in the middle of 527, which helpfully our friend Blamiers has translated. So we've got Harry Blamires here. There we are. New Bloomsday book, one of the sort of staple guides. And in mock Ciceronian style, according to Blamires, it translates as, such and so great is the depravity of this age that our women greatly prefer the lasciviousness, the lascivious titillations of any kind of half man to the weighty testicles and lofty erection of the Roman centurions. There we are. That's our Buck Mulligan, Roman centurion. Are we supposed to think of Panthera at that point, the Roman centurion that was the possible true father of Jesus? Okay. Now, in the second half of that, of page 527, our attention turns to the other person that came in with Mulligan, Alec Bannon, the young gentleman, his friend, overjoyed as he was at a passage that had befallen him. What passage has befallen him? We can only conject that it might be that he's got a new girlfriend and he's having quite a good time with her, and he's very excited and he wants to tell his neighbour around next to him at the table, which turns out to be Crofton, the Scottish student. And because he's from Mullingar, and we know Millie has gone to Mullingar and has referenced a young student in her letter to Bloom this morning that got Bloom a little worried. So we can but surmise and conject as to whether this Alec Bannon might be the very same. And indeed, back in Telemachus, when was it Mulligan's cousin? Bannon's cousin was in the water in the 40-foot with Mulligan, and he says, no, Alec is still up in Mullingar. He's got a new girlfriend who he calls Photo Girl, and we know Millie has got a job in a photography shop. So all the pieces sort of fit together here, meaning that Alec Bannon, boyfriend of Millie Bloom, is sat there opposite Leopold Bloom. Of course, they're not exactly putting two and two together at this point. Right, back to Mulligan. So I think that's pretty interesting. Mulligan then, who is sat there at the table, because sitting's as cheap as standing, he sees the stranger opposite. And this is Bloom, referred to as a stranger. Doesn't really belong. The stranger, the English were the strangers that came into Ireland and took over. But he says he makes him, and Mulligan has seen Bloom once before that day, saw him in the National Library, made lots of jokes about him. And he says, "Pray, sir, was you in need of any professional assistance we could give?" So on the one hand, that's they're all student doctors. Bloom has come to a hospital. Are you here because you need any help professionally? But because this is Lawrence Sterne, and we think of the double entendres littering Tristan Shandy, professional assistance, Mulligan has just set himself out as a professional fertilizer. Is he hinting that the word is out, that Molly puts it about a bit and Bloom is being cuckolded? And do you need me, sir, to step in and help fertilize your wife? Might be another way that we might think about that. Bloom explains no, he's just there to check up on poor Mrs. Purefoy. And then Dixon, Mr. Dixon, or Dr. Dixon, to turn the table, so almost joining in on coming to Bloom's aid, as he did when he treated him for his beast sting. He accuses Mulligan of putting on some weight and questions whether he is he pregnant, or is it just a wolf in the stomach? I can't stop eating. And again, Mulligan rises to the bait, joins in the ribaldry, and references Mother Grogan again looking back to Telemachus, and they're all having a good laugh over it. Right, second paragraph on 5 to 8. I realised in my excitement to get to Lawrence Sterne and all the double entendres of Tristram Shandy and other works, I might have jumped the gun slightly, and I think that we were still in Addison. I think now we're getting to Lawrence Sterne with the words "hear the listener," according to most commentators. And we start with this sort of nodding of the head, this sort of subtle gestures between Crofton and Bannon, one asking for a drink, the other obliging by pouring one out for him. And again, according to Atherton, this is quite a comical reference to Lawrence Sterne in A Sentimental Journey, where he has an encounter with a donkey. And this particular bit about a whole century of polite breeding had not achieved so nice a gesture. And talking of double entendres, Bannon, in pouring out a beer for Crofton, says, "Yes, of course you can. Here you are. Mille compliments, 1,000 compliments, but mille, might that be milli compliments? Or is that just me?" And then for the rest, Bannon explains to Crofton this predicament that he's in. It starts off with how lucky I am, and I praise God for this new girlfriend I've got. And but then, in particular, I said before about might he have come to Dublin to buy condoms, because there is reference right when he was buying a colour to join the wars, to join the army. And here, in the middle of 525, where there is a reference from upon my conscience, even you, monsieur, had been impelled by generous nature to deliver yourself wholly into the hands of such an enemy, or to quit the field forever. So his relationship is almost like, and this, the act of love is sort of likened to the wars or battle, or as wonderful as it is. So might that give credence that where he's come to Dublin from Mullingar to buy, colours for the war, maybe it's actually condoms. And a bit further up from that, monsieur, had you but beheld her as I did with these eyes, at that affecting instant. What instant was that? That affecting instant. What was that? While they were lovemaking, with her dainty tucker and her new coquette cap, so probably not. A gift for her feast day, as she told me, so this cap might have been bought by Bloom, who is worrying about how is he going to protect her 50 miles away, or however, wherever Mullingar is from Dublin, now that she's beyond his protection. So he buys her a cap. Is that a double entendre for contraception? And so he starts off talking about how wonderful having a girlfriend is, and love and all of that. But then down the bottom of page 529, he realizes that he's got a problem when he was last with her, because God would to God that Forsyth had remembered me to take my cloak along. And then we've got a whole page about raining and cloaks and umbrellas and all of this. And I think it's not too difficult to work out. We're talking about contraception, and he didn't have a condom the last time he was with his girlfriend. And so it was very frustrating for him. And now, but tomorrow, now that he's in Dublin, he knows of a marchand de capote, a shop where they sell these, from where I can, for a livre, I can get as snug a cloak of the French fashion, a French letter, as ever kept a lady from wetting. So now we've got the storm, the heavy rain that's come down, and now when we, in this context where we see wetting, where we understand a bit more about what's going on. And it's the rest of page 530 is just full of double entendre. And in that context, we can read 530 seeing through the host of double entendre. Mulligan joins in saying, these condoms, my friend Moore, George Moore, whose party I've just come from, tells me that there are men that are so virile that no condom is going to hold them back. And more than one luckless fellow has sent more than one luckless fellow in good earnest post haste to another world, i.e. shotgun marriage. One thinks of Bob Doran from Dubliners, from the story of Boarding House. And Vincent Lynch joins in, Monsieur Lynch, and his girlfriend Kitty. She won't wear anything like that. She feels that the philosopher, his pretty philosopher, perhaps she's just, well, she can't be religious because they're not married, so she's willing to have sex, but nevertheless, perhaps indoctrinated with certain aspects of Catholicism, won't deal in contraception, and he wants to tell the world about the three ways they avoid getting pregnant when they do it. But she only gets out the first one before a bell goes and she's cut short. But in any event, they are, when they're together, they are as naked as nature intended, the original garb. And the first is a bath, but we don't get to hear what the others are because the bell has gone. Nurse Callan comes in and asks, and whispers into the ear of Mr. Dixon, ironically, because hasn't Kitty just whispered into the ear or licked the ear of Vincent Lynch? So all sorts of ears and whatnot, I'm assuming, takes us into another month of gestation. We're over on page 531. So the boys are respectfully quiet while Nurse Callan is in the room, but once she leaves, the ribaldry takes effect, even worse than before, and leading them is Costello, who says, "Poor, she's a bit of all right. I bet you've done her, haven't you?" And that sort of tone. And Lynch joins in similar vein, talks about, again, his girlfriend Kitty, who seems to be a nurse at the Meta Misericordiae in Eccles Street, saying, "Oh yes, the doctor's there after all these nurses. They're all up for it." Mulligan in his primrose vest. We know that from Telemachus. And wasn't primrose a colour associated then perhaps with cowardice or heresy, maybe? He sort of joins in with a bit of reverie. But Dixon sticks up for Nurse Callan. So before he leaves, he castigates them, really, that they should talk in such a way about a nurse who does such good work and should have such our great respect. And we're well into 532 at this point. And then he turns on his heels and he goes. And they all have a go at Frank Costello. They're all feeling a bit sheepish at having done what they've done and metaphorically killed some more cows, I suppose, more oxen. But Costello says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm a nice bloke, really," and that takes us down most of 532 to the paragraph at the bottom where we revert to Mr. Bloom. And he is mainly thinking to himself, and he was sort of thinking about how these are really just overgrown children. and that they're a bit, how he suffered through the day at the hands of people like this, but he bears it stoically. But of all of them, he thinks particularly about Costello onto 533, and in quite a funny passage at the top there, about how he's sort of like the Darwin's missing link. He doesn't have a high opinion of Costello, and there is a reference to forceps delivery, leading possibly to jaundice. I think I was a forceps delivery, so we're not all as bad as Frank Costello. But here we are. There's a birth. There's forceps delivery, and we know that that Nurse Callan has just whispered something to Dixon, and he's left to go to the ward. So something's going on here. Yes, and Bloom is sort of thinking to himself about what Dixon has just articulated. They seem to be reasonably kindred spirits, but that Bloom won't rise to the bait. But he doesn't have a high opinion of Costello. So I'm going at a faster pace here, I think, because it's reasonably straightforward, and I don't think I have a great deal more to say on 533. We get down to the bottom of it to conclude that while from the sister's words, anyway, he was pretty relieved that after an ordeal of such duress, the baby seems to be born, because it testifies to the mercy as well as to the bounty of the Supreme Being. Don't think Bloom actually is a big believer in God, but there we are. He is when in this, and I'm not sure what style it is. Is it possibly Burke or someone like that? So even though when Nurse Callan came in, she's just whispered something in Dixon's ear, Bloom seems to be of the opinion that something has happened, that maybe perhaps her ordeal is over. Accordingly, he broke his mind to his neighbour, saying that. So he's now speaking with, I think it is Costello, and saying, but he doesn't have a go at him. He just says, shouldn't we be rejoicing at this wonderful thing that's happened, that her ordeal is at an end? And Costello, I think it is him, says, well, yes, because Bloom says, after all, she suffered for days on end, and it's not her fault. She didn't deserve this. And Costello, if it is him, says, no, it's her husband's fault. He's put her in this position. And then Crothers pops up, and so he is either an actual doctor or student. I think he's a student doctor, but he was on the ward when Mr. Purefoy came to visit. He wanted to have a word with his wife, Wilhelmina. And Crothers seems to be impressed that a man of his age, he's clearly getting on in years, can still knock her up, as it were. And Costello again says, oh, if you really think it was him, and he suspects it might be someone else, the man in the Gap, clerk in orders, blah, 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 an itinerant vendor of articles needed in every household. One thinks of articles might be needed in the Bloom household, and the man in the Gap that's paid Molly a visit this afternoon. And towards the bottom of part 534, Bloom again contemplating and hearing about all this frivolity, and yet he thinks they do a few exams, and they turn from this mob of overgrown schoolboys into qualified doctors and the pillars of society. and he even uses the word metempsychosis in there at some point, I think. And that he'd better not articulate out loud his opinions, because he fears they'll all turn on him, for as he puts it to himself, birds of a feather laugh together. We then get to a fascinating passage on page 535, where the tone moves, and we're in the style that commentators attribute to someone called Junius. Junius was a writer of letters to a London newspaper in the 18th century, around 1760s. His letters were very critical of the government, very full of vitriol, and you'll get the style as soon as we start reading this. But in this one, it's really turned on Bloom, and it's you'll see it once we read it. J.J. O'Malloy mentioned Junius in the Aeolus chapter. He just piped up with, and who was Junius? And that was the point, really. They were sort of, these letters were written under a pen name, and people didn't really know who it was. John Hunt in the Joyce Project thinks that it's probably Sir Philip Francis. But anyway, we start. But with what fitness, let it be asked of the noble lord, has this alien, whom with the concession of a gracious prince has admitted to civil rights, what right has he to cast aspersions on our internal polity? Remember, Bloom was thinking about these young kids. They're so rude, they're making all these jokes, and yet they'll all become doctors within a short period of time. And this narrator is thinking, well, who the bloody hell does he think he is, this alien? And it does turn pretty anti-Semitic pretty quickly. That they've been this man who has admitted to civil rights, i.e. that a gracious prince, by a concession, the Jews were allowed back into the country by Oliver Cromwell around the time that these letters have been written, not too much before. And then casting doubt on, he's not even loyal to the nation. In the recent Boer War, he was thinking more about the return on his investment, the 4% that we will find out several chapters hence. Bloom has got some saving bonds hidden away in his drawer. Then we get on to matters sexual. Who is he to think these men are being rude, talking about the sex of Nurse Callan, and how, I bet you've had her, and I bet she's done this and that. Whereas, well, look at him. Not that we want to speak ill of the daughter of a gallant major, i.e. Molly Bloom. Major Tweedy, we'll learn about his army rank as we proceed through the book, but described here as the gallant major. Poor woman, denied her legitimate prerogatives, i.e. Bloom is not having sex at home with his wife. What's he doing? He's going off elsewhere with this very pelican in his piety. This story of the pelican that gives, likened to Jesus, because Jesus gave his blood for our sins, so the pelican will sometimes feed its youth with its own blood if there's no other food. So a pelican in his piety, but he's tried it on with a servant of the house, a housemaid, and if it wasn't for her scouring brush that she beat him off with it would have gone bad for her, as with Hagar the Egyptian. Another Jewish reference is this Abraham. When Sarah was barren, I think he had a baby with an Egyptian woman called Hagar. So all sorts of arrows being slung at Bloom here. Yeah, and then as we turn the page onto 536, It ill becomes him to preach that gospel, referring to something that he getting on his high horse with while he was working for Joseph Cuff, the cattle trader, and ends up getting in the sack. It all becomes him to preach that gospel. Has he not near a home a seed field that lies fallow for the want of a ploughshare? One of my favourite phrases in the entire book. Molly is lying at home, waiting to have sex, and where's Bloom? Out doing all sorts of stuff. We've seen with Gertie McDowell. Now there's an allegation that he's tried it on with the housemaid. What's going on? If he must dispense this balm of Gilead, blah blah blah, then let his practice consist better with the doctrines that now engross him. So the balm of Gilead. Let's talk about that. So it gets a few mentions in the Old Testament. The trees in the mountains of ancient Israel produced this balm that supposedly had all sorts of wonderful medicinal qualities. But then is it as good as it's cracked up to be? And so Bloom supposedly dispensing balm of Gilead, but in nostrums and apothegms. Nostrums is making it more sounding as though it's like sort of quack medicine. And sure enough, John Hunt in the Joyce Project refers to a conversation that he's had with Vincent Altman O'Connor. Very interesting chap. I've not met him, but I've read stuff that he's read and follow him a bit on social media. Actually, he suggests that his grandfather or great-grandfather may well have been an inspiration for Bloom in Dublin, a Jew in Dublin. And Vincent makes the point that there was a product called the Balm of Gilead, but it was made in Liverpool. It was supposed to have some magical essences from the Holy Land, but it was just full of rubbish. It was, sort of quack medicine. So the narrator is sort of suggesting that Bloom coming out with all this pious stuff, but actually he's worse than anyone. Then let him now at least sort of practice what he preaches, but whereas his marital breast is the repository of secrets which decorum is reluctant to adduce, i.e. he was masturbating on the beach, looking at Gertie McDowell instead of spilling his seed into his fertile wife. It was falling on fallow ground. And then he finishes with really getting into the Oriental stuff. This is a Jew. He belongs in the Middle East, in the Levant, where he's plant him there, and all the views he has, maybe that's the way it goes round there. But in a more temperate clime, such as Ireland, we don't hold with views like that. We take the church seriously, and we take marriage seriously. And you should be having sex with your wife, and you shouldn't be thinking dirty thoughts about any other women. That's what seems to be here. But it's really brought back to him being a Jew, about his native Orient. When you would bring him over here, never mind balm of Gilead, what comes out of him is stagnant, acid, and inoperative. I think that's the point. What comes out of him, his bodily essence, his sperm, doesn't produce healthy babies. Look what happened to his baby, died after 11 days. So heady stuff, but beautifully written and joy to read, actually. So that brings us down to halfway down page 536, and we've sort of got two segments left for today's video, I guess. But it occurs to me I ought to, a baby's been born, and we shouldn't gloss over that. This episode is supposed to be, if we think back to Joyce's original letter, it's about the fulfillment of Stephen. The hospital is the womb, Bloom is the sperm, Nurse Callan is the ovum, and Stephen is the embryo. But the baby's been born, and we are probably getting on for 2/3 of the way through the episode. So how does that work? So the Purefoy baby has been born, but Stephen has not yet been born. If the hospital is the womb, then I think it would be the exit from the hospital that marks the birth of Stephen, and some sort of epiphany that he has had that we can talk about at the end of the episode that might mean a change from here on in. So let's deal with these last few pages. And I think that the paragraph that begins with "the news was imparted," for the next page and a half, in fact, sort of the next 2.5 pages, really, we've got a conversation about all sorts of different malbirths. And in its broader sense, including child murder. Babies that are either born with deformity or that go wrong in gestation, or that just don't make it to maturity. So obviously the child's murder were 2 grown men, but the name child murder. And all these different types makes one think of Proteus, perhaps. And I don't think I need to go through all the different examples and explain what they mean, just picking out a couple at random. A cardiac fetus in fetu, so a heart attack, the fetus having a heart attack. Sturzgeburt. This is a condition where the woman gives birth at a very early stage of pregnancy, I think, and talks about all the different weird stuff that Aristotle has classified in his masterpiece. And this looks back to Wandering Rocks. Remember, Stephen was flicking through that book that's got lots of pictures of poor, unfortunate children or births or even adults that are deformed in some way, afflicted in some way. And it's called Aristotle's masterpiece. And as I've said a few times, absolutely nothing to do with Aristotle. It was produced, I think, in about the early 19th century. And then someone thought it'd be good for sales if we link it to Aristotle. Over page 538, all sorts of suspicions associated with things going wrong with births, and I think we can associate this with the slaughtering of the cattle again. There's a reference in the bestiality bit in the middle of page 538 about the Minotaur, a reference to Daedalus. So I don't think I need to speak too much of it, actually. Right at where that passage finishes, at the top of 539, the boys are considering Siamese twins, and should they be separated? The question is put to Bloom. He refers it to Stephen, who seems like a priest wearing his long black coat, and he says, he gives an ecclesiastical response. What God has conjoined, let no man put asunder. Right. So we then move on to our final bit for today, which is this Gothic horror. So late 18th century, I'm guessing. Malachias's tale, where Haynes appears unexpectedly. Perhaps he clearly does just pop his head round the corner to show that, because he says, meet me at Western Row Station at 11:10. I'm assuming that actually happens. His head pops, his head was seen. So we are getting to a point where Stephen could be being born here. Maybe this is month 7 or something like that. And it's a horror story. It's a bit Hamlety. There's references to House by the Churchyard, Sheridan Le Fanu, set in Chapel Izard. There's references to Horace Walpole, Castle of Otranto, these Gothic horror novels. And you've got a bottle of poison in one hand, Celtic literature in the other, and claims to be the real child murderer. He blamed, but he doesn't take the blame. He said it seemed history is to blame, just as he excused the Brits for their treatment of Ireland a bit earlier. And I think Haynes is quite suitable as a persona for a Gothic nightmare. First of all, he actually had a nightmare the night before where he thought he saw a black panther that was chasing him or attacking him. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But this idea, he's got a phial of poison in one hand, Celtic literature in the other. So seems to combine two aspects of the nightmare from which Stephen is trying to awake. Two of the nets suppressing the Irish artistic temperament. On the one hand, he's British. As much as he wants to make out he loves Ireland and things Irish, it's his toy, his bauble. He's over here. He's over there in Dublin as an embodiment of the occupation, if you like, and the usurpation. He's British, and there he is. Number two, he's sentimental for all things Irish. So this Celtic literature that he's got in his other hand, he went off to buy Douglas Hyde's Love Songs of Connacht, the book of poetry. That's why he wasn't in the library, or was it another book that someone had mentioned to him? So he's summing up two, I think, of the 4 nets that Stephen talked about at the end of A Portrait of the Artist. And to really focus in on that second part, we've got some strange language where he says, "The inferno has no terrors for me," then goes on to say, "This is the appearance is on me. Tar and ages, what way would I be resting at all?" He muttered thickly, "and I tramping Dublin this while back with my share of songs, and himself after me the like of a South or a Bullawarus. My Helen Islands is in this life. It is what I tried to obliterate my crime. The grammar, the syntax seems off, and it's as though he's taking John Millington Synge's dialogue from his various works set in the west of Ireland, and the way they spoke and the rhythm of the speech of the west of Ireland, and is supplanting that, spatchcocking that onto his Oxford English, and it comes out really weird and stupid. But that sort of sums up Haynes, in my opinion. And then where it says, destruction, the Black Panther. So maybe it's just me, but I like to think that he looks upon Bloom at that point. He was pretty anti-Semitic in that first chapter, that how England is in the hand of German Jews and Ireland needs to escape while it can. And as the nightmare of the Black Panther, Bloom, this dark stranger, has been associated with a cat all the way through, the step of a pard, and various other allusions. And so I think maybe there's something in that. And then at the bottom of that page, the sentimentalist is he who would enjoy without incurring the immense debtorship for a thing done. This is what Stephen put in his telegram that he sent to Mulligan. And it sort of sums up Stephen's view of Mulligan, that how he will go through life incurring debt and just enjoying the pleasure of it without sensing that he's put other people out, that he's created a debt, that he's just taking favors from others without any intention of paying back. And I think maybe that is how Mulligan is at this point is seeing Haynes and the British generally. Well, that's my view anyway. And then we got a reference to the Black Panther at the end there being the ghost of his own father and Stephen's Hamlet theory, and a literal reference to, the lonely house by the graveyard is uninhabited. The house by the churchyard, an obvious reference to it, but also potentially back to the child's murder with whom Haynes is now identified, and sort of the murder of the Irish child, the Irish nation, the murdering of the Irish nation, certainly its artistic nation, preventing it from being able to be born and grow and mature. And I think this reference here is that the actual child's murder takes place in a road right opposite Glasnevin Cemetery. It is pretty close to the churchyard of the Memorial Chapel. And Joyce would know that because his aunt lived in the house next door. So murderer's ground. And I think that's the way it speaks to me. Right, well, that was where we read to this week. So I'll draw things to a close on that portentous note of murderer's ground. So I think in our next time in the pub and then next time in our reading video, I think we've got a chance of finishing this very challenging episode. Let's hope so. Until then, Russell Raphael, North London Ulysses, bidding you farewell.